God damn it, folks. This is a banana republic. Okay, let me tell you. They do not want honest, brave, patriotic men to speak truth to power. Okay? That's right. Some people, like Judge Engoron, are terrified of the honesty and bravery exhibited by someone like Donald Trump. This, of course, came after the closing argument. But I suspect this is what he wanted to say. He basically pulled a shower argument moment after. Now, he didn't have to go to the civil case. He did not have to attend this case proceedings at all. He did it anyway. So what did he do? Well, his lawyer asks for permission to have Trump speak. Engoron says, "Do you promise to just comment on the facts and the law?" Trump doesn't even respond and immediately starts talking without agreeing to Judge Engoron's question. He starts saying this. I'm going to read it out to you. "This was a political witch hunt. We should receive damages for what they have taken our company through. They have no documents. They have nothing. The only thing they have," Trump concedes, "is the triplex, which was a mistake. I'm not sure the dollar amount would have been that far off if you want to know." But Trump continues, "I am an innocent man. I have been politically persecuted. This statute is vicious. What has happened here is a fraud on me. The amount of taxes I've paid over this period is close to $300 million. They don't want me here anymore. I have a problem. They want to make sure I don't run again." Trump goes on without any interruption from Engoron or her team and attacks Letitia James, accusing her of election interference, says, "You have your own agenda." Trump angrily says to Engoron, "You can't listen for more than 1 minute." And then Engoron, the judge, finally pleads with Mr. Keys, I don't know how you say his last name, and says, "Please control your client." Trump nonetheless accuses Letitia James, the Attorney General, of going after him for political gain again. Or not Attorney General, sorry. Letitia James is a DA, District Attorney. Right? I think Letitia James is the District Attorney of New York and not. Or no, she is the Attorney General. She used to be a District Attorney, and she is the Attorney General now. So, yeah. From the Southern District of New York. All right, so anyway. And then he says Letitia James is going after him for political gain, including an allegedly failed run for governor, at which point Engoron shuts it down. But it's too late. Everything Trump wanted to say was said. And now, having said it, he has left the courtroom after insisting James should pay him for the havoc she's wreaked on his company. So some of the asks from prosecution are, I believe, $370 million in damages for the false representation of the property value in general. Another ask, I think, is to permanently bar Trump from doing business in New York, and on top of that, bar his children from also doing business in New York for at least 5 years. Those are the asks from Letitia James. And considering how unimaginably and ruthlessly brutal he has been to both the judge, who literally received, apparently, death threats and bomb threats before the final day where he was supposed to hear closing remarks from Trump supporters, I don't know what will happen. But what I do know is that's probably not a good thing. Okay? I mean, I think unconditionally, across the board, bomb threats and death threats, not great, right? Like, and I'm not even talking like top of the hour bad. Like top of the hour ad break, not great. Bomb threats, really not great, okay? Like if Judge Engoron was watching a 3-minute ad break at the top of the hour, I'm sure he'd feel some type of way, unless he was subscribed, at which point he could avoid it. Bomb threats and death threats, on the other hand, definitely not good, okay? Especially when you're like a judge. Here's a 3-minute ad break. Now, by the way, you can avoid it by subscribing for $5 or for free, or by getting gifted a sub. Judge Engoron. So, That's so brave of you to say. Yes, bomb threats are bad. Thank you. Okay, exactly. That's, you come here for the brave takes. Anyway, let's hear from our brave boy, though.
Before experts, and do I think any of it mattered? I certainly hope so. But for anybody that was in the courtroom for the last 11 weeks, you heard that there was not one fact against President Trump. There was not one piece of paper that showed anyone committed fraud. And don't forget that Section 6312, a consumer fraud statute, has been wrongfully used against my client, innocent defendants, the organization, and every employee of the Trump organization, which has single-handedly changed the New York skyline, including the building we are in today.
Yes, this is the person speaking right now is Alina Habba, also known as the gamer lawyer.
These are special properties. Real estate is an art, not a science.
That's awesome. She's great. When I hear stuff like that, I understand why Trump selected her to be the trial lawyer here.
But you know what else is an art? You know what else isn't a science? Political motivated individuals. She's using this to paint a canvas.
Awesome.
That Donald Trump is a fraudster because they can't beat him in the polls. They can't beat him in the polls, so she ran on Trump because that was the only way she could win. And now, today, after 11 weeks, after 3 years, we have concluded that he indeed committed no wrong. The Trump organization committed no wrong, and the kids have been dragged in just like the other defendants, and it is wrong.
The kids. I love thinking about, Trump's sons as just the kids. Let's see. Trump sons ages. Yeah, it's look at this, dude. You got one that's 40 years old and the other that's 46. She's not talking about Barron Trump, who's 17. She's talking about the other two fail sons, not Barron. Barron must be protected. He's like 6'8". He's going to be a baller. He's the next out. Okay, he's going to 5-star camp. That's the next Jokic. Okay, that's the next Joker. So, the idea that Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump are just kids is pretty awesome.
America needs to step up, and there's only one person who can do that. My client, Donald Trump. President Trump, everybody.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we've gone through years with this person. She's a political hack, the Attorney General. The judge is obviously extremely friendly with the group.
Why'd you call her the gamer? Because she games. She has a gaming laptop.
May surprise people on a positive side. We'll have to see what happens exactly. But we've proven this case so conclusively. We've asked for directed verdict many times. They don't have any facts. They don't have any evidence against us. Millions and millions of pages, years of...
Do they think they can just talk their way out of all these charges? I actually don't understand. What is this? When the world thinks you're a gamer because the court's live transcript feed computer is placed in front of you? Wait. Trump's lawyer sports gamer laptop at $250. Wait, no, she's not a gamer? I love how trashy she is. I would risk it all. Yeah, that makes me sad. All right. I mean, it's a big benefit for her, to be fair, because it's like, I will admit, when I thought she was a League of Legends player, that made me think less of her. Not the fact that she's Donald Trump's, probably worse lawyer, but the fact that the fact that we even speculate that she may be playing League is, definitely a way worse mark on her. So, anyway, getting back to the matter at hand here, though, you asked, do you think they think that they're going to talk themselves out of these charges? And I actually don't really know how rich people operate in this circumstance. Alex Jones' defamation suit, right? Alex Jones' defamation suit led him to, have to pay $1 billion. And he's still in operation, and it seems like he's still doing it. And And it's the same for like Donald Trump. Like, I don't know if he has a lot of money. I don't know if he has like I don't know how many billions he actually does have, right? So, like, what's he thinking? He's just going to give 300, he's going to make this payment? I guess he'll like hold it up in courts with appeals for as many years as he possibly can. Right? Hassan, you are rich. Star blurbing is a socialist. Sarcasm. Yes. Yeah, I am. I mean, I don't know how rich Trump is. I might be just as rich as he is, to be honest, but that's not necessarily because I'm super caked up. It's just he's a broke boy, is my suspicion. So I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know why they do this kind of stuff. Like, they get involved in these legal battles. And then they just get these massive trial awards, right? And it doesn't make any sense. Like, what the goal is, what the momentum is, how you deal with it after the fact, what the repercussions are if you don't actually pay, or what the payouts look like by the end of this process when you do actually pay it off, or you're forced to pay it off many, many years in the future. I don't know. I mean, these guys are like the second defamation suit for E. Jean Carroll was one of those questions I had. Like, was why it's so easy to just not defame this person immediately after you lost the defamation suit, which Trump did. He went on CNN and he defamed the person who he had recently lost a defamation suit to in the exact same way. And for me, like, I don't know what the purpose of that is. Like, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Like, or does he think he's just going to get away with it? I don't really understand that at all. And I don't understand this at all either. I mean, I get it. For him, this is like a $370 million penalty that he is going to use as yet another instance of like political persecution. He's being attacked. He's being attacked for his political beliefs. That's what he is using this for. He's using this as another stepping stone or a soapbox moment, I guess. Like, look at me. The elites are coming after me. And they're not just coming after me. They're coming after you. I'm just in the way. Right? That sort of thing. So I don't know. I don't really know what his goals are here.
Litigation and all politically motivated. She campaigned on I will get Trump. If you've ever seen any of her clips, they're horrible clips, actually. The anger. She's got serious Trump derangement syndrome. There's no question about it. Letitia James, the corrupt Attorney General of New York. So we've proven our case. There's not one witness against us other than one person who is a deranged. He's got a lot of problems. He's a man who's been convicted of lying. He's a felon, convicted felon, and not a good person.
Seems like his goals are to be president. Yes, I think that his goals are to be president no matter what the cost. And partially because, I think he seriously thinks that he might get legal repercussions if he doesn't make it. If he doesn't make it out the mud, he's worried. If he doesn't become the Republican Party's candidate, or if he doesn't actually take it to the general, and if he doesn't have the base of support and the institutional powers within the Republican Party and all of its organs, all of its instruments like Fox News and like all of those think tanks come to defend him, he might get cooked. Or at least he thinks he's going to get cooked. Because like normal presidents, what do? They go in, they're out, they're in and out, they do the president thing, okay? They do a bunch of war crimes. And then what do? They retire and they go hang out with billionaires like Richard Branson, and they do podcasts and they do Netflix specials. I'm talking about Obama, obviously. Like, Trump is not interested in any of that, right? Like, or Jeffrey Epstein with Bill Clinton. They paint like George W. Bush. Overall, they just kind of chill out. They write books. They make a couple $1 million doing speaking tours here and there, speaking engagements. Trump, on the other hand, is, brother, you've been saying this is the day he will face legal repercussions for years now. You sure this time? My friend, if you think I've been saying this is the day he will face legal repercussions and not just he thinks he's going to face legal repercussions, I think you've gravely misunderstood what I'm saying. I've always maintained the position that he thinks he is going to. Just now, earlier, just a moment ago, I said Trump thinks at the very least he is going to face legal repercussions, whether that is true or not. The idea that I'm one of these like Blue Anon style, this is surely going to get him now type liberals is pretty funny. I like that.
Person, but that's their only witness, and he's now crashed and burned. They have no witnesses. And by the way, that witness took back everything that he said. He took back everything he said in court, took it all back. So they have no case. It's a shame that a thing like this is able to happen. Businesses leave New York. She went after Exxon, and they decided to move to Texas, and hundreds of millions of dollars they pay in taxes. I paid over $300 million of taxes over the last number of years, $300 million, and they don't recognize that. They don't recognize anything. So think of it, not one witness, millions of pages of document, years of this nonsense, and now it goes on. And one other factor, we won this case already in the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals voted in favor of us, but this judge has been very, very slow to accept that opinion because that's not the opinion that he wants. But we won in the Court of Appeals. That's the boss of this judge. He has to know that. And it was a conclusive victory, statute of limitations and other things. And that case has already been won. So that's the story. And I thought we'd come down to 40 Wall Street, which is a great building, and you'd get a chance to see one of the nicest buildings in New York and a convenient place. And I don't have to pay any rent, because we have it, and it's been a very successful building. But it's a shame to have gone through this for years and years and years, and now we'll see if we're going to get an honest verdict. We didn't have a jury. We had no rights to a jury. It's a statute that's never been used before for a purpose like this. I just watched a certain broadcast, and they said, you know, they've been looking, has it ever been used before? This is a statute that's a consumer fraud statute, never been used for anything like this before, and it's a shame. It's really it's a witch hunt in the truest sense of the word. It's election interference, and it just came out. This was just
dude. It's like, I mean, it's pretty funny to consider everything election interference. Like if you are caught doing a crime or something, right? If you've like defrauded people, right? All you need to do is run for president, and then you could just say, they're coming after me because I'm running for president. And there's probably enough people, as long as you have the dumbest ideas of all time, there's going to be enough simps and stans on whichever respective stan Twitter space that you were occupying that will believe you and go, no, that's right, actually. Awesome.
Just right now, Letitia James visited Joe Biden in the White House numerous times during the Trump witch hunt, and this just came out about.
Once you're over the age of 35, you should just do that all the time. Just do crimes and then run for president.
10 minutes ago, I got it. And so it's all a conspiracy to try and get Biden, who can't put two sentences together, trying to get him into office. So I just want to let you know that we have our best poll numbers, we have the best everything, despite this, and maybe because of this, because the people of the United States, all of those people back there, but the people of the United States really get it. They get it better than anybody else. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, do you agree with your lawyers what they said on
I have to pee.
Tuesday, that you should not
Please.
be prosecuted or could not be prosecuted if you ordered SEAL 2 and 6 to kill a political opponent?
Well, you're talking about a totally different case, the immunity. I say this, on immunity, very simple. If a president of the United States does not have immunity, he'll be totally ineffective because he won't be able to do anything, because it will mean he'll be prosecuted. strongly prosecuted perhaps, as soon as he leaves office by the opposing party. So a president of the United States, I'm not talking just me, I'm talking any president has to have immunity. As an example, Biden could come out and you could get him on the border, you could get him on what happened in Afghanistan, a horrible, most embarrassing moment in the history of this country. You could get him on a lot of different things. You could get him taking cash from countries. You could get him on the prosecutor not prosecuting his son or the company or whoever it was, Burisma, in Ukraine. You could get him on that, where it was a quid pro quo, if you remember that. If they don't drop the prosecutor, we're not giving them $1 billion of U.S. funds. If you don't have immunity, you can, you won't be making any decisions. So you have to have it. And I liken it to the fact that police have to have their control back. They have to have respect. And you can always have a bad apple. You can always have something happen.
This is my favorite type of argument for crime and policing in America, is that because they quite literally have everything that they possibly could get, because cops, as I jokingly say all the time, live in like a Nordic-style social democracy, while the rest of us are not in that at all. You know what I mean? I mean, unless you're like unless you've reached like the top 1% of wealth, when you're functionally a god king. And I know this, obviously you're going to be like, says you, but yeah, exactly. You're in the United States of America, if you're like working a regular wage job, okay, you don't have any of the amenities, right? You don't have any of the labor protections. Whereas, if you're a cop, it's as though if you are like a steel mill worker in Germany, right? You get the health care, you get the pension, you get job security, you get all of that. So because they have all of that and then some, with qualified immunity offering them so much protection to be above the law, you finally arrive at a position where if you want to say, like, what can we do to improve cops' living conditions or job conditions, you basically have to say, they don't get enough respect from the American population. Because when you talk about nurses, or when you talk about any other real job, for example, when you talk about nurses, when you talk about teachers, when you talk about any number of real jobs, like, there are so many obvious issues with that profession that you can point to that desperately needs fixing. Nurses are understaffed in hospitals deliberately by hospital administrators, right? Teachers are underfunded. They don't get paid enough. And the public school system is fundamentally broken. So it's like, you don't see teacher flags on the back of pickup trucks. No, my point is, because cops have basically everything. Because cops have basically everything they want, everything they need, the only thing that remains that they don't have in that situation is like the respect of the American population. So now that's what your complaint is. Like, oh, the police are not being respected enough. And it's like, well, how are you going to enforce that? What are you going to make it illegal to say mean things about cops is now a hate crime or something? Like, it's just so dumb.
But at the same time, you have to stop crime in this country. It's very much like that. It's very similar to that. But you have to have immunity for a president.
Legally, you must compliment a cop.
I've read a lot of legal reports lately and scholarly reports that are saying you really have to have a president of this country has to have immunity, or they're not going to be able to function in office. Yeah, Bob?
President Trump, we're just days away from the Iowa caucuses. What percentage of your time these days is spent on your campaign, and what percentage is spent on your legal issues?
Well, see, my legal issues, every one of them, everyone, civil and the criminal ones, are all set up by Joe Biden, crooked Joe Biden. This is something that's never happened in this country. Even when you look at this is all about Biden and her meeting.
They're gonna turn policing into a protected class and it'll be considered hate speech? No, it'll be the only hate speech. Okay? The only time hate speech is real is if you are criticizing a cop. Okay? Or the state of Israel. Not Jews, the state of Israel. You can be anti-Semitic, and that's fine. That's not real hate speech. But if you criticize the state of Israel, that's hate speech. The only two real hate speeches in the United States of America is criticism of the state of Israel and criticism of police officers. Okay? Every other group, marginalized identity, ethnic background, none of that is what constitutes for real hate speech. I mean, even Elon Musk is trying to do the cis is a slur thing, right? Yeah, he's trying to do the cis is a slur. The real hate speech is against white people, is against cisgender people, it's against cops, and it's against the state of Israel.
So even the civil ones, this is civil, they're set up by Biden. Every single, just about, case that I'm involved in is set up by Biden. They're doing it for election interference. And in a way, I guess you'd consider it part of the campaign, because if you really look at it, they are doing this. It's never been done like this in this country. It's like we're a third world country, a banana republic. But every one of the things that you write about are Biden indictments. And I don't know, I just got a poll. We just had a poll.
What do you mean, Biden indictments?
It just came out, and we're leading massively in Iowa. We're leading very big in New Hampshire. We're leading because the people understand this stuff. These are all set up. Every time somebody sees me in court, remember, Joe Biden and his thugs that surround him did it. They're trying to get a man in office that can't put two sentences together, and they're doing that. But so far, we seem to do very well.
The Iowa caucus is Monday, and
Kaya, come here.
Tuesday. Are you going to be back in court for the Eugene Carroll case on Wednesday?
Yeah, well, that's another one. That's sponsored by Reid Hoffman and some Democrat operatives. I never saw this woman in my life other than they have a picture with her and her husband, John Johnson, a nice guy who was a newscaster many years ago. I remember him, and she said horrible things about him since. I mean, horrible, horrible things, called him bad names. I have no idea who this woman is. I have absolutely no idea. The whole thing is ridiculous that this is even a case. This should never have happened. But again, this is sponsored by the Democrats. That's another case. All sponsored by, it's a demeaning kind of a thing, and that's what they want to do. It's called election interference.
All right, please.
And yeah, I'm going to go to it, and I'm going to explain. I don't know who the hell she is. I have no idea. They called me up years ago.
Horrible.
And they said, do you know about this woman 25 or 30 years ago? She doesn't even know the date, the time, the month, the season. She has no idea. And if you read and if you watch, take a look at the Anderson Cooper interview of her. And if you take a look at that, Trump is so innocent. But we have been given a very unfair trial there, too. I don't get very fair trials in New York.
Have you made a decision about whether you're going to show up for the federal trials? You've showed up here in New York for your civil fraud trial. You've just said you're going to show up for the Eugene Carroll case. Are you planning to show up in court when they begin, whenever they begin?
Sure. I would do that. Well, the documents case,
I'll be there no matter what.
Biden, and he didn't have the Presidential Records Act, and I do. What I did, nothing wrong. What he did, a lot of people say substantially wrong. You can't have two tiers of justice in this country. But no, I want to go to all of my trials. These are all set up by Biden and the Democrats. This is
Big Titty Goth Girl. Thank you for the 10 gifted subs. This guy said man, woman, camera, child was a big achievement. It was perhaps the biggest achievement. Okay, low key though, looking at the state of affairs with respect to Brandon, it is technically kind of a big achievement, especially when you consider like whether or not Biden could do that currently. I'm just saying. Think about that.
their new form of cheating. This is, like last time, this is their new form of cheating. So far, I think it's gone very much against them. Yeah, please.
Yes, during the hearing, you said that Exxon left New York because of the New York Attorney General's case, but Exxon actually left in 1989.
No, they took the rest of their divisions out. Yeah. They left earlier. They were treated very badly in New York. You could have had them in New York. They could have been paying a lot of money.
But it wasn't Letitia James.
Oh, no, I think if you take a look, you read the case, study the case, you'll see that they took big divisions out after that. They originally left and then they took the rest out.
You just said you get President Biden on various issues you outlined?
I didn't say I could get him on anything. I said he is using the weaponization of the DOJ and the FBI to go after his political opponent, and you just can't do that. Thank you very much.
Coward. I'm just saying, he said he was going to do that and then didn't, okay?
Let's go.
Which is like, can we give Kaya subs? Yes, of course. All of your gifted subs technically do go to Kaya anyway, regardless, because that's what I spend my money on. This is such a tired old argument. He keeps saying Biden is demented, mentally inept, but he's in the same sentence saying Biden is, oh, Kaya! I said place. What is this? Better recognize. Why can't Biden do that if he has immunity? What do you mean? He said that Biden can be prosecuted because of border policy. So that's the thing. Nothing that Donald Trump says makes sense, because on the one hand, he's saying as president, he should have immunity from crimes that he has committed. Meanwhile, all of his defenders said during the impeachment process, let the courts handle it. And then now that the court is trying to handle it, his lawyers are saying, no, he should still have immunity as president. While also, simultaneously, he's saying he should have immunity, but also Joe Biden is prosecutable as president. Because this is, ultimately, this is a weird bind that people find themselves in. And if they're looking for like honesty or moral consistency here, you're not going to get that. There's no intellectual honesty here. It's just about self-preservation. Okay? It's always, it's okay when I do it. It's not okay when anyone else that I don't like does it. That's the whole point. Nah, bro. He said if presidents don't have immunity, then Biden could be prosecuted for XYZ. Yes, except he's also advocating for Biden to be prosecuted. That's the whole point. He's saying I should have immunity. If you don't give me immunity, then Biden could be prosecuted. And actually, as a matter of fact, Biden should be prosecuted. Do you not see how stupid that is? Like, think about that for a second. Just for 1 second. Now, of course, liberal academia won't agree with him. Yeah, liberal academia. Now, obviously, Kaya's collar might be on too tight. You are delusional, my friend. That's not the case at all. Her collar is literally so loose that it can come off. She's just fuzzy. She's just fluffy. I've talked about this quite a bit, and I guess, it bears repeating because there's always new people in the chat who are unfamiliar with this process. If Trump can be prosecuted for things he did while he was in office as president, which he should be, because every man should be equal under the rule of law, right, in the criminal justice system, then so can previous presidents. And in a just world, I agree with that. And that should extend to actual war crimes as well, things that presidents have done at the behest of American empire. However, what is this? What is this? What is going on? Now, it won't, but there's also a way where Trump can get prosecuted given the uniqueness of his crimes. Because Trump's crimes do not pertain to advancing American empire's interests. He's done that as well, obviously, but he's not being prosecuted for those things. He's being prosecuted for advancing his own personal interests, oftentimes at odds with American hegemonic power. That is the problem. That's the reason why, Nixon could get into legal trouble and legal scrutiny in the same way that Trump could get into legal trouble and legal scrutiny, and even in the way that maybe even Bill Clinton could get into legal trouble and legal scrutiny, but not in the same way that Barack Obama could, right? For drone striking, extrajudiciously murdering an American citizen, which, by the way, Trump also killed another member of that person's family, for the record, who's also an American citizen as well. So, but of course, no one cares about that, and everyone cares about the civil fraud that he's engaging in, that he is engaged in, according to the criminal justice system, or the January 6th insurrection, or a litany of other issues. His only current defense is whataboutism. It's so insane. Well, like I've said, debate lords are lawyers. Lawyers are debate lords, and the more you level up in your debate lord mentality, the higher you reach in the justice system. Supreme Court justices of the United States of America being like the maximum, like the maxed out debate lord status. So for that reason, yes, I do think that whataboutism is not exactly valid in a court of law, but it's still used, and people use it all the time. They do it specifically to, I guess, change the minds of a jury, but there was no jury in this situation because maybe somebody failed to file the right paperwork. I don't know who. Anyway, let's continue. Let's see what CNN has to say.
Let's get the latest from inside the courtroom now with CNN's Paula Reed. She's live outside the courthouse for us. Paula, a bit of a surprise that the judge would allow Donald Trump to address the court.
Nothing is surprising here, Boris, but things certainly taking a turn in the last few minutes. We know yesterday there were negotiations we had learned between the Trump team and the judge here about possibly allowing Trump to participate in closing arguments. Now, this would be highly unusual. Closing arguments are an opportunity for lawyers to summarize their case. The Trump team would not agree to some restrictions the judge laid out, insisting that Trump stick to the material and relevant information and not attack the district attorney or the judge. So things had been business as usual here. The closing arguments went forward. Trump's attorney, Chris Kise, summarized his argument. Other attorneys got up to summarize theirs. But then Chris Kise got up just a few moments ago and asked if former President Trump could address the court. And he then launched into what our colleagues who were inside described as a monologue, telling the court, quote, "The facts are the financial statements are perfect. There are no witnesses against us. The banks got all their money paid back. There were great loans. This was a political witch hunt." That is really how Trump and his lawyers have framed this entire case, as a politically motivated and manufactured allegation.
He's like, everybody
now,
won.
Trump says,
Win-win,
when you
bank
say
won.
don't go outside of these things, we have a situation where I am an innocent man. So he's referring to the restrictions that the judge tried to put on any participation that he would have. He said, quote, "I'm being persecuted by somebody running for office," referring to the district attorney who did promise to investigate Trump when she ran for office. He's insisting that I have to go outside of these bounds. So here he's making his case to the court, but also arguing with the judge and the restrictions the judge wanted to put on him. Now, I want to bring in our colleague, Kara Scahill, who is right next to me. Kara was inside the court earlier for oral arguments. Now, Kara, you called it. You knew that Trump couldn't get through the day without participating in some way. I mean, is this surprising?
I mean, that's the whole point. That's the reason why he went. He didn't have to go. He did not have to attend this court proceeding at all. He wanted to go specifically so that he could say some stuff, okay? Because that's the whole reason. He's using this as like a campaign stop.
You know, nothing in this trial has been surprising. Everything that we think is going to happen according to certain courts changes, and it doesn't happen. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the judge allowed Trump to speak, because part of the reasoning he gave initially.
Strategically speaking, do you think these trials are a good idea? I feel like it helps keep his base together. I mean, I think it's perfectly valid for whoever to be prosecuted for, defrauding institutions, okay? If you are greatly overvaluing your real estate properties to a degree that is like beyond comprehension, because this stuff happens all the time, especially in real estate, okay? There's a lot of tricksters. But the idea that like you can do it in the way that Trump did, where you look at like a property that is maybe maximum 100 million and value it at like 1 point whatever billion, then yeah, when you're getting out loans, while simultaneously when you're paying taxes on said property, you devalue it and you say this is actually costing me quite a bit as a depreciating asset, then at that point, I do personally believe you should get a little bit of legal scrutiny. I mean, that's crazy. That is the entire point of the court system, right? So I think that's fine. It's ridiculous to just look at this and go, well, I don't know what the political backlash of such a thing is going to be. Well, it don't matter, right? I think as far as like the pure politics of it all, there are some court cases that are relatively sillier, right? The district attorney one launched in New York about like the hush money. I mean, there's still clear wrongdoing there, but it's not as like it definitely is a charge that was amplified because of Donald Trump's own personal doing about or no, I'm not talking about, that's document mishandling. Sorry. The other New York State case, that one is like definitely the weakest case against Donald Trump. That probably does, play a role in making it seem as though the government is after him or whatever. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter, right? His base doesn't believe anything. Like, what do? Do you let him get away with everything? You can't do that because that's a dangerous precedent. And also, if you let him get away with it, it doesn't really change anything. If you at least attack him with the court system for very clear-cut violations of the law, then you atrophy him a little bit, you piss him off, you take his attention away from campaigning. He can try and campaign off of this as best as he can, but ultimately there's still a limit to how much of the audience he can capture.
Of why he would allow Trump to speak, as he said he had more on the line in this case than anyone else. And since there is no jury, he said it was only fair to let Trump speak. But of course, as you just laid out, Trump went beyond the contours of what the judge wanted to be permissible.
I don't think tons of moderates and normies are really following any of this stuff. Yeah, there's also that other side of things. I talk to my normie friends quite a bit about this to get a better feel for what's going on in the world of normal. And obviously, if you're in here, you're probably not a normie. You're probably a little bit more tuned in to what's going on. And I don't think they care. They don't really care. They just like see Trump as a bad guy who is corrupt, or they just don't really pay attention. Like on the more Republican adjacent side, on the center right of normies, they still think like Trump is a loudmouth and brash, and they don't really like him that much. And then on the center left side of things, on the liberal side of things, they are just not paying attention to this at all. Everybody collectively thinks two things, okay? The broadest majority of voters, if you were to ask them, in my opinion, this is my personal assessment, if you were to ask the broadest majority of voters, they would tell you two things. Joe Biden is incredibly old and probably shouldn't serve in office. I don't think he's mentally fit to serve in office. And Donald Trump is brash, he's corrupt, he's a bad dude overall, and quite, I wouldn't say problematic, but just like rude and annoying and a distraction, right? That is the two sides of the American political spectrum right now. And those are the guys who go out and vote when the time comes. So that's the situation at hand, and that's part of the reason why a lot of people have just completely checked out of the political process and don't even care. They're not even following.
Here by talking about a witch hunt, by making this a political case and not arguing just the facts in the case. But for closing arguments, for the bulk of it, they were mostly delivered by Chris Kice, his attorney, and he did stick to the facts in the case. And he went through the evidence that was presented, saying to the judge that the Attorney General's office did not present any witnesses who testified that there was fraud here. And that has been
this election probably going to be pretty anemic turnout. Oh, 100%. This is a race to the bottom. Right, it's a race to the bottom. Both candidates that are slated to become their party candidates are very unpopular, and even unpopular in their own parties as well to a certain degree. Obviously, I think Trump, if he reaches the candidacy point, if he gets out of the primaries, which I think he will, he is going to be able to capture the base again, but is the base of support enough for him to win? I don't think so. That's the problem. The Republican Party's, passionate supporters are not enough to win a national campaign. But on the other hand, you have Joe Biden. And the Democratic Party, which has all of the opportunity to have profound victories all around the country, casting it aside. And it's crazy. It feels like they are, you know what it feels like? It feels like the Democratic Party is playing down to the level of their competition. It literally feels like if you had like a retired basketball player, a professional NBA player, okay, who's well past his prime, but like he could still easily dunk on a bunch of like kindergartners, but he's just like nerfing himself for no reason whatsoever. That's what it feels like. And of course, the stakes are much higher than a basketball, like a recreational game of basketball. UIT did a segment that proposed the point is to be silly and ridiculous that people check out. Actually made a comparison to the rise of Hitler. The propaganda has always been honorable down to his hand movement in his speeches, but now he's even quoting the MFer. No, I don't think so. Anyway, but I don't know if he's like, I think if Trump was, that interested in Hitler and trying to repeat Hitler that much, that would require him to care about anything outside of himself. And I don't think he cares about anything other than himself. Like, I don't think he's ever fancied another individual, whether it be Hitler or not. Like, sure, he has a lot of political opinions that are adjacent, dare I say, Hitlerian. But I don't think he's the type of dude who's going to sit there, read a book, and like desperately try to craft his own persona off of like Adolf Hitler. You know what I mean? I think he's telegenic. I think he knows what hits. I think he knows how to read the room. And he is a great marketer for a very specific audience. And I think, he understands what the Republican base of support is looking for. But sometimes his own personal narcissism gets in the way of that. Like when he kept talking about January 6th over and over and over again, or when he kept talking about how the election was stolen from him over and over and over again. And he legitimately pushed larger swaths of the Republican base away from himself. Like, part of the reason why the, I guess, suburban whites that normally would vote for the Republican Party reliably, normally that there would be normal Republican voters are moving away from the Republican Party and voting for the Democratic Party a little bit, is because, I think they got sick and tired of hearing him constantly say the election was stolen from him. That's it. This is embarrassing, but look how bad Haley kills Biden. Yeah, well, Haley needs to make it out the mud, and I don't think she's going to be able to, so that's not a thing that you need to worry about at this moment. And yes, Nikki Haley is like a dream Democratic Party candidate for many Democrats, I think. I'll be honest. Just like your dream should be to avoid the top of the hour ad break, which is a bad, not a good, but a bad segue, because we are going to now move on to the International Court of Justice. From the American civil courts in New York to the International Court of Justice, I am bringing on Jeremy Scahill to come on board and talk to us about the International Court of Justice, where South Africa has started its case against the state of Israel. All right, let me turn off my camera really quick. I'm going to start the video call now. Hello? Okay, I can't see you. I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, I can see you now. Can you hear me? You won't be able to see me yet. But can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you as well. All right, perfect. I'm going to turn off my camera on here. We're doing live production.
No problem.
So, it's a little bit wonky at times. Oh, wait, actually, you know what? Let me see if I could just do the virtual camera on here. Let's see. Boom. There it is. Okay, now you'll be able to see me. Okay, let's do the pop out. All right. Jeremy Scahill, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. First time caller, long time fan.
Same here.
I'm very okay. You don't mean that. That you don't have to say that. Don't worry. Okay. Is there any way to like raise your microphone volume a little bit? Is this the microphone that you do the podcast on as well?
Yeah, hold on here. All right.
No, I've
going
cranked
into
up your volume.
This is the first time that I've used this Discord platform. Hold on a second. I know this is totally embarrassing. I said on Twitter that my parents love your show.
That was also, I assume, fake news.
My mom is watching right now, and it's totally. I told her not to click on anything.
Okay. Yeah. No. Don't.
Is
do
this
that.
better? I made it louder.
Yeah, it is better for sure.
All right.
All right. So some things happened this past day. Or I guess last night, from where I'm at. I'm in Los Angeles. The case against Israel started. Case being genocide. And you've covered it. You wrote an article on The Intercept on the matter, and I wanted to talk to you about it. There's obviously some other stuff that we could talk about, but I think that it's important. And the overarching goals here are obviously South Africa laying out the case that I think they did a pretty good job with on why Israel is committing acts of genocide upon the Palestinian population, something that they've basically brought about themselves. So there are two different things I want to ask you. One, what is the difference between the International Court of Justice versus the ICC, the International Criminal Court? Let's start there.
Yep. I mean, on a political level, the International Criminal Court has always sort of been viewed as a U.S.-dominated tool. And for much of its history, it operated in an ad hoc manner. So you had the war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s. So the United States advocated for setting up an ad hoc tribunal rather than implementing a permanent international criminal court. In fact, the United States does not recognize the International Criminal Court as having jurisdiction over all countries. It prefers for nations in Africa primarily to be subjected to the jurisdiction of something that nonetheless is called an International Criminal Court. And in fact, both Democrats and Republicans alike throughout U.S. history have undermined the U.S. actually fully accepting that an international court would have jurisdiction over the United States. One wild thing that's totally true, but a lot of people don't know about it, is that in 2002, George Bush signed into law a piece of legislation that had widespread bipartisan support that came to be known as the Hague Invasion Act. Yeah. And what that law says, and it's still on the books, by the way.
Yep.
Interestingly, Joe Biden voted against it. But that law is still on the books. And what it says is that not only does the United States not recognize the International Criminal Court as having jurisdiction over the U.S. and its allies, but that if there is ever an attempt to prosecute any U.S. personnel or the personnel of any, or extradite or bring any sort of proceedings at the International Criminal Court against U.S. personnel, not just soldiers, any U.S. personnel, or personnel of allies of the United States, that the President of the United States is authorized to initiate an invasion of the Netherlands to liberate any U.S. personnel being prosecuted or charged with war crimes.
They've had it coming.
They've had it coming. So the ICC is overwhelmingly a court that is used by powerful nations to prosecute the Yugoslavias and the Rwandas of the world, and the vast majority of the cases that have been prosecuted there have been against involving African nations. When we talk about the International Court of Justice, this is the official world court that was set up by the United Nations in the aftermath of World War II. And the United States actually has been convicted at that court of terrorism. It was convicted in the early 1980s for the mining of the waters around Nicaragua when the United States was fueling the dirty wars in Central America. And the U.S. was actually convicted at the court. One tidbit of history, though, is that the president of the current tribunal that is hearing the genocide case that South Africa brought against Israel, the current judge in that case, who is the head of it, is an American judge named Joan Donoghue. So the Americans have the presidency of the court right now that is hearing a genocide case against its its dear friend Israel. So Joan Donahue, if people watched it today, you saw her. She was the one that was presiding over it. She was one of the lawyers for the United States when they were convicted of terrorism at the World Court for mining the harbors in Nicaragua, and she now is the president of that tribunal. Now, having said that, the International Court of Justice is widely viewed as a much more neutral force when it comes to international
Can I interject here
justice.
real quickly
Yeah,
and
go
ask
ahead.
you a
What do you
question?
think?
I don't want to. If I'm not mistaken, the Nicaragua court case also still had an American judge on it, obviously.
Yeah.
And the American judge actually ruled against the United States' interests in that court case, as far as I remember. So, like, that is a unique situation. Yeah.
I'm throwing that out there because I think that certainly the United States would like to assert its influence over any judgment there, but that's not always how American lawyers operate. Not every single American, even though this judge is close to Hillary Clinton, even though she was one of the lawyers defending the United States in its own case before the court, doesn't necessarily mean that she won't be fair. But what we do know is that the Biden administration has already preemptively said that this case is without merit, and has said that the charges of genocide are ludicrous and have no basis. So they're already doing a sort of preemptive defense of Israel. But the United States is not in control of the International Court of Justice the way that it is able to assert its influence over the ICC. So now, having said that, even if this court rules that, so first of all, people should understand this. What South Africa is asking for right now in an urgent manner is not to convict Israel of genocide, not to even find that Israel is engaged in genocidal conduct. What South Africa is arguing is that there should be a trial of Israel for genocide, and they walk through the Genocide Convention in meticulous detail. But what they're actually asking for is for the court to issue what they call provisional measures. What does that mean? It means that they're saying that if this court has jurisdiction, and if there is enough evidence to take it to trial, that the court should order the defendant, Israel, to halt its military operations, because failure to do so, in the event that it's true that Israel is committing genocide, would mean that it is now blood on the hands of the court for refusing to stop an ongoing criminal activity when they had the authority to do so. So a lot of people think like, oh, Netanyahu's going to be on trial. That's not what this is about. What this is about right now is that South Africa, as a signatory to the Genocide Convention, has the right to bring a case. Any country could have done this that's a signatory to the convention. It's significant that South Africa brought it because of its history with apartheid and terrorism in its own country, and apartheid backed by the United States. It's also significant that the South Africans had a very brilliant lawyer from Ireland, and Ireland has been very outspoken, perhaps more than any European country, in standing up for the Palestinians during this slaughter. So what the South Africans asked for today was for the court to issue provisional measures instructing Israel to cease its military operations in Gaza, pending litigation on the question of whether or not Israel is committing genocide.
Yeah. So and today they laid the facts out, which are so public and so broad. And one distinction here, if I'm not mistaken, is that the ICC has the capacity to convict people, whereas the ICJ is just for UN nations, and it's a nation versus nation thing. So, like,
and this is why, for instance, I'm glad that you're raising this point. So, for instance, many of the leaders in the former Yugoslavia stood trial as individuals, including heads of states. Slobodan Milosevic, the former president of Yugoslavia and then Serbia, died during the course of his trial, actually, at The Hague. And
very famously.
And you also had that thing where the guy took it looked like he was taking a shot of whiskey, but he was actually poisoning himself and died. I mean, this happened also at the International Criminal Court. So it's a crazy scene there. But so Israel is basically, their defense is basically going to amount to repeating October 7th, like 8 bazillion times, October 7th. And one of the lawyers for the South Africans, who actually was a rather old British lawyer, was tasked today at the court was sort of preempting some of Israel's arguments. And what he said was, Israel is going to seek to say that Hamas should actually be on trial here instead of Israel. But what this lawyer pointed out, he didn't make an emotional statement. He said Hamas is not a nation state. Hamas is not a party to the Genocide Convention.
They could. Israel could technically, if they wanted to, try to. From what I understand, they could technically go to the ICJ, but that would require them to recognize Palestine as a nation state. I think with a tacit recognition that like Palestinians have autonomy, and that goes against their overarching interest of dominating them. Am I not correct on that?
There is that, but also there's a radical oversimplification of what Hamas is that takes place in the international discourse. You have Hamas as a political entity, and then you have the military wing of Hamas. And I'm not trying to nitpick here, but facts actually matter. And Israel's entire narrative is that this is not a governing body; this is a terrorist actor.
Yeah.
And so what the lawyers for South Africa said today was there are proper venues to prosecute the war crimes that Hamas may have committed, but this isn't it. And what they and then went further and said the United Nations recognizes that Gaza is still occupied territory. Israel disputes that and says, "Oh, we pulled out, we removed our settlements." What the United Nations has found repeatedly is that Gaza still constitutes an occupied territory because Israel is entirely in control of its land, its air, its sea, all basic necessities of life that come in and out of there. When Israel's defense minister said early on in this, we're going to shut everything down, the electricity, the food, etc., he meant it because Israel knows how to do it because they have been doing it for a very long time. So, while Israel is going to try to make Hamas the defendant in this case, I don't think that is going to fly, even with the American judge. As much as the United States and the Biden administration constantly goes back to October 7th as being a justification for, the mass killing of tens of thousands of people, the maiming of tens of thousands of people, the extraordinary level of death of children, the fact of the matter is, and the South African lawyer said this, retribution is no justification for genocide. You can't wage a war of revenge. And if international law is going to matter, then facts are going to matter. And so Israel's entire defense that we have the right to do whatever we want because of October 7th actually is not consistent with any basic principles of international law. It's just a fact.
Yeah. As the belligerent occupier, a case can't even be made to a right to defense against the people that you are the belligerent occupier over as well. So there is the notion of like, this is my assessment of the situation, is what I've been saying at least, is like on October 7th, inside of the boundaries of what is known as Israel proper, yes, the Israeli occupying force, the Israeli Defense Force, did have the right to defend its citizens like a police force would, right? Whereas everything beyond that, especially the Gaza operations, would constitute as something outside of the bounds of a right to defense that Israel does not have. It's as a belligerent occupier. It doesn't.
Well, also, look, I find myself saying this when I argue with people. I heard you on the show earlier talking about conversations with normies. I'm surrounded in my entire life by normies. My family, we're from the Midwest. I talk to people all the time. And the thing is, like, the way that this has been portrayed, for the first narrative on this was that 1,400 civilians were killed. That was the first draft of history that was promoted by the Israelis about what happened on October 7th. When you actually start to review the details, it's much more complicated. We're talking about just under 800 civilians that were documented to have been killed. We're talking about a couple hundred soldiers that were killed. Hamas attacked a number of military installations. Certainly, war crimes were committed that day, without question. I think it's utterly atrocious to take old people, babies. There was one 10-month-old that was taken hostage. No one with a heart and a brain would be defending that conduct. And no one with a heart and a brain should be defending the conduct that Israel engages in regularly when it arrests children, and puts them in military tribunals. So if we want to talk about facts, then we need to understand which groups did what on October 7th, because you had Hamas, you had Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and then you had what appeared to be independent actors that came in.
Yeah.
We then have to break down once the siege was laid to the kibbutzes and to the music festival. What did the response of the Israelis look like? If you read the Israeli press, in many ways, it's much more open and transparent about what actually happened on October 7th than the American press. There is a very serious discussion right now in Israel about how many Israelis were killed by the Israeli military
Yeah.
when they responded to Hamas. And this is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is in mainstream Israeli newspapers.
Ynet.
And Ynet, Haaretz, the major TV networks have been interviewing witnesses who describe the Israeli forces shelling it. You have a history in Israel there's a number of doctrines, the Hannibal Doctrine and others I'm sure you've talked about before, where there are times when Israel prefers to actually kill its own people before they can be taken hostage. There are other Dahia Doctrine and others that say that it's acceptable to kill your own civilians if you need it to shut down a terrorist operation. So I'm not saying that I know all of the facts. What I'm saying is none of us do right now. And there has been a lot of inflammatory, incendiary allegations made, because if you say it was Hamas, you can accuse them of anything. You can say that they were literally eating people's body organs on that day. And there's a significant portion of the Israeli public, and unfortunately the American public, that will believe it without requesting a single shred of evidence.
John Fetterman.
Hey, I'll do you one better. Joe Biden. Joe Biden is out there. He, not once, not twice, but at least 3 times, Joe Biden has said that he saw pictures of babies that were beheaded by Hamas. Not even the Israeli government continues to make that assertion. I read the names of every single Israeli civilian that has been identified as being killed. There was a little girl who was 10 months old that was shot while she was in her mother's arms. She is the only child under 1 that was documented to have been killed that day. There were a number of other children. The Israelis initially said 40 babies were beheaded. They told stories about living children being placed in ovens. There is no evidence, but the most powerful person in the world, Joe Biden, or at least Joe Biden, the body of Joe Biden is filling the position of the most powerful person in the world. He keeps repeating this propaganda. They laid siege to Al-Shifa Hospital, telling us there was a Hamas Pentagon underneath it. And then when the Israelis actually went in there, the Baghdad Bob of the IDF takes cameras down there, and what do they find? They find something that looks kind of like an old underground operating room with an air conditioner that wasn't even attached, and it looked like no one had been in there for a very long time. I wouldn't be shocked if Hamas guys hung out in hospitals. I know from reporters that often people would meet people to do interviews there. There's a difference between that and firing RPGs from the roof of Al-Shifa. There's a difference between that and actually having a Hamas Pentagon under Al-Shifa. So the United States said, we have our own intelligence that indicates that that's true. The entire thing was a fraud. It was a fraud intended to give cover to Israel to lay siege to civilian targets. So to bring it back to what we're talking about today with this hearing, I didn't learn a single thing that I didn't already know from what the lawyers for South Africa said today, because everything they were saying is in the public domain.
Yeah.
But what was chilling about it was to hear it in a court that under the law has the authority to say to Israel, this must stop immediately. And that actually is worth something, because it's going to call the question to nations around the world on whether they believe in international law or they think that the United States should continue to be the emperor over international jurisprudence, where it dictates who the law applies to and who it doesn't apply to. One final thing, it was really chilling when they started reciting, and if you read their 84-page filing, the South Africans, over the course of 9 full pages, they are citing quotes from Israeli officials that are clearly genocidal in nature. Not just Benjamin Netanyahu invoking the biblical tale of Amalek and, kill all their children, their women, the babies, the livestock, but others talking about genocidal intent. And what they did is they played some of those by video, they read others, and then they connected it to soldiers on the ground clearly understanding those as official orders. That is genocidal intent. And, I was struck by the thought, because I've followed all these statements that these guys have made, these criminal genocidal statements. But hearing it in that court today, I realized the reason that Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and all these other people feel so comfortable making such shocking genocidal statements publicly is that they have the confidence that nothing will ever happen to them as a result of making those statements. It doesn't even register to them that anyone would be able to hold them accountable because the bully of the world is their backer, the United States. And already these toadies, John Kirby at the White House, National Security Council, Matt Miller, a guy who has no soul and no conscience, out there every day shilling for the genocidal operations.
Who's done such a piss poor job that even the IDF had to, at a certain point, be like, all right, you're good, you're getting ahead of this, and you're causing political pressure for us internally inside of Israel by speculating on like potentially the reasons as to why Hamas is not releasing some of the female IDF soldiers, which at the time was, once again, like you've mentioned, presented as though these were also female civilians and not like active enemy combatants that they'd held captive as prisoners of war, as hostages, and that they were refusing to release them. And Miller famously speculated that it's because Hamas wants to, or either has harmed them or wants to harm them further, and that's why they refused, and that's why the negotiations fell apart. This was so out there and caused so much political turmoil in Israel that the IDF had to correct the American State Department.
Yeah, I mean it's totally true. I mean when you have people like Benjamin Netanyahu saying, "Hey, tone it down a little bit," like that says something. It reminds me though, Hassan, of this story about Biden from which I think is one of the most revealing stories. I mean, first of all, people should understand Joe Biden's been in office longer than almost any American politician. 50 years, senator, vice president, president, and since 1973, he's been a totally committed Zionist. He calls himself, Israel's best Catholic friend. But in 1982, when the Israelis invaded Lebanon, a guy named Menachem Begin was the prime minister of Israel. And he comes to Washington because the Reagan administration actually, even though they were, Reagan was an incredibly pro-Israel president, but they were concerned about the mounting civilian death toll. If you go back, at one point, Reagan even told the Israelis that it's starting to look like a Holocaust. He used the term Holocaust. So contrast that with, Biden today. But Biden at the time was a senator. So Menachem Begin comes to Washington and he gets grilled by all these American senators over the rising civilian death toll. And Begin then goes back to Israel. He talks to reporters and he tells reporters, but there was one senator who stood up. This is 1982. One senator who stood up and gave an impassioned defense of our invasion of Lebanon and said that if he was in the same position in the United States and he was dealing with a threat like that, he also would support the killing of women and children. And Begin says, that senator was a guy named Joe Biden. And Begin himself was a war criminal from 1948 in the Irgun militias, as part of the original Nakba. So this guy is saying, I had to tell that senator, no, those aren't our values. So Biden, even back then in 1982, was going further than the Israelis in, at least in this meeting with Begin, in defending the killing of women and children. No one should pretend that Biden doesn't enthusiastically support what's happening right now. His entire career indicates that that's exactly what he believes. And also Antony Blinken has never met a war in the Middle East that he just wasn't, fucking in love with.
Yeah. He has been a very enthusiastic supporter, and I think he's ideologically stuck at a different time. Like, I think maybe because of his brain capacity diminishing or whatever, but like, I do think that that there is a diminish, like our soft power and our influence around the world as the United States of America is like waning a little bit right now, and yet I feel as though this is the reason why there's so much division even in the State Department as far as what we see in the media, with people coming out and saying like, we got to dial this back. Even Anthony Blinken, who, like you correctly pointed out, has never met a war he doesn't like in the Middle East, was on after meeting with Hakan Fidan in Turkey on October 8th, had actually tweeted, knowing full well what was about to happen, the scale of the atrocities that Israel was about to commit, had tweeted out to a cessation of the hostilities and then quickly deleted it. And I feel like this is there's a reason for that, and I think that they're internally they recognize that letting Israel operate in the way that it has with impunity has made it has made America look weaker in the eyes of the rest of the world. In my opinion, I feel as though this this also is a grave threat to those who want to maintain the American empire to a certain
Well,
degree.
I mean, yeah, I mean, a bunch of things there I think are really smart points. I mean, also with with the war in Ukraine and the fact that the United States and NATO, and particularly Germany now has totally transformed itself into a war machine where it is exporting military hardware. It's starting to flirt now with troop deployments. It's becoming a very aggressive. It's sort of like a mini. It wants to become apparently like a mini America in Europe right now. What though is what's lingering on the sides of this? Look at China. China has for many decades operated in a much smarter way than the United States on the continent of Africa in its approach to international conflict. China is now under Xi Jinping making a run at sort of being a global diplomatic force to try to make peace between different countries. So, I mean, I think that the United States is flailing in its imperial project in many ways. But what you're also seeing, like in the case of the Gaza war right now, there's this axis of resistance that's been formed, as it's called in Iran, where you have the Iranians, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, you have Hamas in Gaza, you have the Ansar Allah in Yemen, the Houthis. That's a whole other story unto
Oh yeah.
itself. I've spent a lot of time in Yemen. The Yemen declares war against Israel and has implemented a very successful blockade to the point where that they have the most powerful Western military forces in the world now deploying to go after the poorest country in the Arab world. And they are defiant, utterly defiant.
By the way, this just
Nasrallah.
broke.
Yeah.
This just
Yep.
broke, actually. According to the political editor of the Times, Stephen Swinford, Britain is now expected to join the U.S. in carrying airstrikes on Houthi military positions in Yemen tonight. Rishi Sunak briefed cabinet on imminent military intervention this evening. Sir Keir Starmer, Labour leader, and Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, have also been briefed. So they are finally, I guess, even the British are finally getting involved in trying to combat this blockade, which I think is moral and just, by the way. That's my personal perspective on it. You don't have to agree with like Ansar Allah's political positions or whatever, but ultimately I do think that they're doing the right thing.
I mean, look at I asked really early on in this slaughter in Gaza that the Israelis are conducting. I talked to Rashid Khalidi, the one of the most important Palestinian intellectuals in the world, a professor at Columbia University, and I was asking him, about Arab nations and their position, just sort of watching this happen. And he said it's been many decades before any of them, since any of them have been willing to do anything. So for Yemen to do this is quite extraordinary. And in the eyes of many in the Arab street, they're utter heroes for what they're doing. Set aside, who the Houthis are or what's happened in Yemen, just the fact that everyone is watching this mass slaughter and saying, where are the Arab nation states? Why is no one confronting Israel? It actually matters. And look, what's happening in Lebanon is really concerning. The Israelis are intensifying their attacks. Hezbollah is also carried out a strike against a fairly significant Israeli military base. The Israelis have had to evacuate tens of thousands of their own citizens from the border with Lebanon. And let me tell you something. Hezbollah ain't Hamas. Hezbollah is a much more serious fighting force with much more sophisticated weaponry. I mean, Hamas largely is manufacturing its own weapons. I mean, obviously, it gets weapons smuggled in. There's no question about that. But Hamas is at a stage where Hezbollah was, 10 plus years ago, and so Hezbollah is also the only force in recent years to defeat Israel. And if the Israelis think that they're going to be able to fight a multi-front war without constant U.S. rearmament, they're sadly mistaken, because the reason that Antony Blinken keeps having to circumvent congressional review to push through emergency shipments of tank shells is that the Israelis can't sustain this without the United States. So when people say, "Oh, what do you want Biden to do? He's not the president of Israel." No, he's the arms dealer of Israel. He's the political
Yeah.
defender of Israel. If Biden
Yeah.
wanted this thing shut down, it would be shut down. That's what happened in 2021. Biden basically said to Netanyahu,
One phone
"Okay,
call.
you've let it
Yeah.
burn enough." And within 48 hours, there was a peace deal being brokered between with the Egyptians and Israel.
Even this time around, when Yoav Gallant, who famously, the defense minister, said we're fighting human animals and that's why we have to shut off their food, electricity, and everything, like all aid going into Gaza, had to back away from that position at least marginally early, like a month into the ethnic cleansing campaign. And when Israeli media asked him why he is allowing aid to go into Gaza, albeit limited aid, but still any aid to go into Gaza, he very famously said, and this was like often not really reported in American media, but he very famously said, "Well, what am I supposed to do? America asked us to do that. What am I going to do? Say no to America?" And that is the reality, and that's precisely the reason why Israel, in my opinion, does probably more media, more Western-facing media in English than it does in Hebrew for its own domestic audience. And there's proof for this as well. Benjamin Netanyahu has actually appeared on Western television more times since October 7th than he has on Israeli television. So there's a reason for that. It's because he already has a tremendous amount of support for the actions in Gaza. He doesn't have a lot of support overall. Obviously, the overwhelming majority of the Israeli population want him to resign immediately. But
yeah, I mean,
as
his
far
constituency is along the Potomac. It's
Yeah.
it's and I mean, one other interesting thing about that, and it doesn't really get talked about a lot, but Israel. I think Israel is actually militarily losing the war against Hamas. And people might say, "Oh, what are you talking about?" Israel's waged a very effective campaign against the civilians of Gaza. They really have perfected the art of mass murder of
Oh, yeah.
women and children and the elderly, and killing 200 plus medical workers, destroying all of the hospitals, causing starvation, causing endemic diarrhea among children. They're really successful at the war they're waging against the civilians. But if you actually are monitoring both the Israeli propaganda and Hamas's media channels, Hamas is constantly posting videos of them blowing up, of their operatives blowing up Israeli tanks, killing Israeli soldiers. There's one video where a Hamas operative pops up from a tunnel hatch in the middle of a camp where Israeli soldiers are just sitting around, hanging out, and they film them around, just showing, "We can access you anywhere, anytime."
Yeah.
These tunnels that they have under Gaza, hundreds of kilometers of them, the Israelis captured video from an engineering corps of Hamas building some of these tunnels, and they have to use equipment that doesn't register seismically to dig out some of these tunnels because the Israelis have such extensive surveillance around it. But there's a video of Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, his brother Mohammed, driving a car through the tunnels, and he's sort of like, take a right here, then a left there. The Israelis have not penetrated even a fraction of these tunnels. And so the point I'm getting at here is that this is going to hit a point where Hamas is not going to be defeated. Israel desperately needs to kill Mohammed Daif, or the military commander of Qassam brigades, or Abu Obaida, the spokesperson, or Yahya Sinwar. They have to kill somebody so they can say, "We did it. Here's our victory." But the reality is that they're not even militarily defeating Hamas right now. They are militarily exterminating and expelling the Palestinian population, forcing them into a smaller and smaller killing cage. That's what they're doing. But, top Israeli defense reporters are starting to hint at this, that this isn't going well for Israel on a tactical military level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the classic struggle against an occupying power as well, just like Ho Chi Minh has said before. And I think either it was the PFLP or the DFLP leader at the time who said, you kill 10 of us, we kill one of yours, we're not going anywhere. it's going to end when you get tired, right? And
Right, and remember,
that is the dynamic.
And remember that people will say, "Oh yeah, well look what happened to ISIS, in Iraq." Hamas is not ISIS, and Hamas. No one wants to really talk about this, but why does Hamas exist? I mean, part of the story has to do with Netanyahu and other extremists in Israel wanting Hamas to exist because they viewed it as the best way to prevent a Palestinian state. If you had people that were perceived as extremists or violent jihadists or what have you. But the reason, the political reason why Hamas or Hezbollah or any of these groups exist is because of the occupation, is because of settler colonialism, is because of imperial agendas, is because of exterminating people from their lands. And the people of Gaza in particular, and I'm sure you remember this, Hassan, in 2018 and 2019, the Palestinians organized a massive nonviolent series of marches that spanned months. Every Friday, it was called the Great March of Return. And Israel responded with utter force to those nonviolent demonstrations. In fact, Israeli snipers, some of them who gave their actual name, have openly admitted in the Israeli media that they were keeping account of who could shoot the most kneecaps of Palestinian
42
protesters.
in one day. One IDF sniper openly stated. So the IDF itself took ownership over it. The IDF itself took ownership over it when they tweeted out and then quickly deleted, even though B'Tselem captured it for posterity, that they had accounted for every single bullet and where it had landed. Tens of thousands of people were intentionally maimed, wounded by Israeli sniper rifles. I mean, pregnant women were killed.
So when that is the response to a nonviolent demonstration, which presumably is what the world is telling the Palestinians, that's the proper way to resist Israel, is nonviolently. You don't do things like raid a military base or kidnap a soldier or take a soldier prisoner. Those things are unacceptable, but nonviolent protest, that's acceptable. Well, actually, it's not acceptable because then you get shot in the kneecap or you have pregnant women getting shot. So when that is the message, what means do the Palestinians have of resistance? Why is it that Hamas now, the armed resistance in Gaza right now, is incredibly popular among Palestinians? Why is that? Is it because everyone loves Hamas? No, it's because a child is Hamas, a journalist is Hamas, the hospital is Hamas, everyone in Gaza is Hamas. There are no children, there are no civilians. The UN is Hamas. The UN Secretary General is Hamas. Ireland is Hamas. Spain is Hamas. South Africa is Hamas. Belgium is Hamas. When everyone becomes Hamas, when you shoot and murder nonviolent protesters, when you intentionally kneecap them with sniper bullets, of course the only means available to the people is armed resistance. Yeah. It's also what happened with the Irish. It's what happened in South Africa. It's what happened in revolutionary struggles all over the world. And I'll say one last thing on this. No one should believe a single word that ever comes out of the mouth of Israeli government spokespeople unless there's like 3 or 4 independent sources showing that it's true, because they have lied about everything. And, it's not that I say, oh, give Hamas the benefit of any doubt. It's that you don't give Israel the benefit of any doubt. Like, Israel lies repeatedly, and it's documentable through this entire, we can talk about the last 3 months, but you can also talk about decades. They're lying about everything constantly. So their word should not be worth a penny when it comes to a statement of the facts on the ground in Gaza. Nothing.
Yeah. And Western media absolutely is complicit because they have basically a standing IDF spokesperson early on since October 8th to immediately contextualize the violence that the Israeli forces are subjecting the Palestinian people to in their ethnic cleansing campaign. And even and beyond that, whenever Israel will come out as a state actor and openly lie and even deliver inconsistent, sometimes incoherent evidence, false evidence as to whether they were the ones who struck the Al Ahli hospital or the Al Shifa hospital, and how Israel never would strike a hospital, immediately the media jumps on that and actually changes, in my opinion, the way they have covered the atrocities. Two things I wanted to point to here. One is an analysis that I saw. Hold on, let me see if I can pull this up really quickly. One is an analysis that I saw about the way that the atrocities have been covered in Western media and how oops, that's not, I'm at my bookmarks.
Oh, you're talking. This was a piece that The Intercept did. That it was Adam Johnson. You're talking about the analysis of American newspapers and how they cover Palestinian deaths versus Israeli deaths.
Yeah, exactly. The Intercept coverage, yes. The disproportionate coverage mentions of Palestinian deaths declined. Here it is. New study shows that the New York Times, Washington Post, and LA Times is systematic bias. For every 2 Palestinian deaths, Palestinians are mentioned once. For every Israeli death, Israelis are mentioned 8 times, or at a rate of 16 times more per death than of Palestinians. Yeah.
I mean, and look, we also did a story recently, my colleague Dan Boguslaw, showing that, CNN, any report that is done by CNN, including reports that are done in the United States that deal in any way with Israel, have to be run through the Jerusalem bureau of CNN, which is subject to the Israeli censors' oversight. And I mean, I remember a story that like the late Alex Coburn did, back in 1999 about CNN having interns from the Pentagon in their newsroom during the bombing of Serbia. There's a long tradition of news outlets subjecting themselves without full disclosure to censorship and monitoring by government entities. And there's a cross-breeding between, a revolving door. It's not just lobbyists and politicians. Also in media, you have people hopping from government positions back to media and back and forth. And, some news outlets also are working with people who are just fresh out of their jobs being propagandists for the Israeli government. So, I mean, look, the Palestinians are being systematically killed off in Gaza right now. There's plans to try to force them into the Sinai Peninsula, a long kind of colonialist, dream. News organizations are doing what they always do, which is that they give every lie that Israel floats gets sort of a pass, and every single claim of a Palestinian death has to be like quadruple proven. Look at the president of the United States says, "Oh, I don't have any faith in those death numbers." Actually, to be quite blunt here, the Hamas Ministry of Health death numbers are almost certainly conservative because of the formula that they use, where it has to be someone that's come through the hospital system or the morgue system in some way. There are other estimates when you take into account missing people and under the rubble that are far higher. And I think they're reasonable numbers, far higher than the Hamas-run health ministry numbers. The whole thing, the world is upside down. The victims have to like go out of their way to prove that their loved ones died. Look what they're doing to Wael Dahdouh, the bureau chief of Al Jazeera Arabic in Gaza. They murdered this man's family.
His entire family.
They murdered his family. Then they murder his cameraman and leave him for 5 hours bleeding out. And then last week they then murder his oldest son, who was a reporter. And then the Israelis say, after Anthony Blinken made the big mistake of answering a question and expressing some sorrow for Wael Dahdouh's suffering, that his entire family has been systematically murdered by Blinken's friends in Israel. Blinken makes this mistake, and the Israelis then magically pop up and they say, "Here's a document we found proving that Wael Dahdouh's son, who also was a journalist, actually was a secret terrorist operative and on the payroll
of the Islamic Jihad."
Of the Islamic Jihad. I don't believe for one second that Israel deserves to be able to make such an allegation without actual proof. And like we know from their Baghdad Bob, his conduct in the hospital, where he shows the scheduling sheet and says, "Aha, see, this is the sheet where all the Hamas terrorists were signing up for their guard shift duty to guard Israeli hostages." And it turns out it said nothing of the sort. It just took one person speaking Arabic to look at it and say, it doesn't say what you're saying it says. So I think that when we look at 100, I think we're on almost 110 journalists now that have been killed over the past 3 months by Israel. It's a mass murder campaign against journalists. And look, Evan Gershkovich, who's in prison in Russia, I think he should be freed. I think it was an atrocious war crime that the Saudis committed by butchering Jamal Khashoggi. But where are all the big CNN stars of the world who every day tweet, "This is how many days that Evan Gershkovich has been in prison"? Where are they when 110 of your colleagues have been murdered murdered with American bombs, murdered with American bombs,
Yeah.
clearly in an intentional campaign to wipe it out. You know, the Washington Post has the audacity to keep on their, thing that, democracy dies in the darkness. Where is the systematic outrage from American journalists over the murder of our Palestinian colleagues? They are the eyes and ears of the world to a genocide that is unfolding in real time. And,
Yeah.
and many of them, their families have been killed, their houses have been destroyed, their colleagues, their cameramen, they're being systematically killed. And where is the solidarity? It's devastatingly horrible. I'm ashamed to be an American journalist. Actually, right now, I'm ashamed to be an American journalist because we have failed, utterly failed our colleagues in Palestine, utterly failed them.
Absolutely. There's another thing I wanted to talk about the International Court of Justice, because tomorrow, or at least I guess in a couple hours, we're supposed to hear from the Israeli side on its defenses, right, against the gross accusations of genocide and ethnic cleansing, which has been clearly laid out, oftentimes with evidence that the Israeli soldiers and, like you said, the Israeli officials have voluntarily given themselves. And their reaction to that, I suspect, is going to be somewhere along the boundaries of how they've tried to contextualize this violence and why it's a necessity over and over against this October 7, a relitigation of October 7, with some of the most embellished aspects of it, in my opinion. And then beyond that, talk about how this is actually a war against Hamas and not against the Palestinian population. And it's oopsie, it ends up killing overwhelmingly, I believe, 70% women, children, elderly, like outside of the male combatant age group, which even then is not 100% that is going to be a militant regardless. So one thing I wanted to ask about is what do you suspect will happen when this court case goes through, if the court itself finds that Israel is not guilty, I guess, of the accusation of conducting a genocide? And while you answer that question, I'm going to go pee really quickly. I'm going to be away for like 1 second, but chat will listen, and I will hear you as well. Sorry.
All right. Let's talk some shit about Hassan while he's gone. No, well, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how Israel actually presents its defense. Obviously, there almost certainly is going to be a sort of detailed retelling of the Israeli version of the events of October 7th, and I think they're going to try to put the focus on the fact that their perspective is that they're fighting a war against terrorism, and they're going to compare it to 9/11 and talk about principles of self-defense. And they'll, of course, present a legal based argument to argue that, in fact, they have the right to do this. And it's, probably going to be a well-presented legal argument because, Israel has very serious lawyers. But what I think is a problem, and I think that in the absence of this, I think it would be much easier to see the court letting Israel off the hook, so to speak, is that Israel, its own officials, from Netanyahu to the defense minister Gallant to Herzog, the president, to multiple members of the cabinet, to members of the Knesset, they're on record, on video, on audio, saying openly genocidal things. And so, all of the facts that were presented today in the court by South Africa's lawyers about the nature of the crimes and the argument that these crimes constitute genocide, Israel is going to have legal responses to all of those things. There's no question. And, if you were just a kind of completely neutral person who was just walking in out of nowhere with no context, and your only job is to listen to legal arguments, I'm sure Israel's gonna do, some of their lawyers are gonna do an effective job at arguing their case. The problem that they're gonna run into, though, at the end of the day, is that the public is deeply aware of the fact that Netanyahu made these statements, that Herzog made these statements, that Gallant made these statements. I think that actually is the strongest evidence. It's stronger evidence than and it's sad that this is true, than the sheer destruction of civilian life and infrastructure and culture in Gaza. The most damning thing, I think, for the Israelis, the riskiest part of the case for them is that they've all been caught on tape openly saying these things. One of the lawyers for South Africa said today, usually you have to dig up these kinds of statements to prove genocidal intent. And he said,
Yeah.
what's extraordinary about this is that they said all of these things and they're continuing to say these things. So, and even if you read the Israeli press, there have been several columns in the Israeli press saying that this is the thing Israel is concerned about with this case is that, you don't need Chris Hansen to come into the room and be like, here, let's play the tape. I mean, it's like they're saying it on an ongoing basis. There was no need to secretly record anybody saying anything. They were giving speeches laying out everything they were going to do. So, not that I can imagine being sympathetic to Israel's legal arguments, but I would predict that they're going to do an effective job at arguing in a kind of meticulous way that this statute and that statute apply here, and that we had a right to do this, and that this is not true. Even though the UN said this, let's look at who the UN personnel are. They'll probably try to put some of the UN people on trial by default or whatever. But setting that aside, it's all caught on tape. It's all caught on tape, and that, I think, is what makes this an extraordinary situation. Because can you imagine, those judges listening to that stuff today and then later being like, yeah, we ruled that didn't indicate any genocidal intent. I mean, it just, when you take that combined with, even if half of what South Africa said today was true, and you combine it with Netanyahu and Herzog and Gallant and all these statements, that's a slam dunk case, showing genocidal intent. And that's the standard here. They don't need to prove that they committed genocide. South Africa just needs to convince the court that there's jurisdiction and a reasonable basis to have a trial on this, and then the judges have to stop it. So I think there's a solid chance the judges rule in South Africa's favor, but nothing is ever certain in these matters. And I bet the U.S., Israel, and others have everybody wiretapped and are listening to everything that everyone is saying. They probably have all of the South African lawyers bugged. They probably have the court chambers bugged. I mean, the NSA is probably listening to everything. But whether or not the U.S. is going to be able to actually do anything to stop it, I don't know. I mean, it's
but even if they do, even if they rule in favor of South Africa, like, what mechanisms does the United Nations have in this circumstance?
Yeah, they ruled against Russia. I mean, they ruled against Russia, and Putin was basically like, I'll use that order as a piece of toilet paper. I mean, it's, there is no actual enforcement mechanism. And you know why there's no enforcement mechanism? Because of the United States.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
if the United States agreed to play by the rules that they want the Rwandas of the world to be subjected to, or the Putins of the world subjected to, then you have a real serious case to be made to Vladimir Putin and say, oh, hold on a second. If the United States is doing this and you're not, no, you're the rogue of the world. The problem is that the U.S. is just a more sophisticated kind of rogue, and pays a lot of lip service to the rule of law. Putin's very happy to be perceived as a gangster, but the U.S. wants to be perceived in a different manner. So but you're asking a real question, which is, there is no enforcement mechanism, and there's no enforcement mechanism by design because the United States won't allow it. But what is significant, and what I think is real, is that if the court does rule that Israel needs to stop this, huge pressure is going to be then put on America's European allies. Because how is it that the European Union is going to then stand up and say, oh no, we support the flagrant violation of an order from the World Court that we all have accepted the jurisdiction of? That's the problem here. And so I don't have any illusion that, like, the United Nations is going to, deploy blue helmets to go and stop Netanyahu's bloody rampage. But this is going to be an interesting development in Europe, because a lot of American allies are going to be in a bad situation because they don't go as far as the United States on these issues. The U.S. is, definitely, they want the U.S. to do what it's doing. They like that the U.S. is taking the hit for vetoing all this shit. But at the end of the day, they have to deal with their own public. And the general public in many European countries, they're getting increasingly fed up with this stuff. They're also sick of the war in Ukraine. They're sick of their energy prices rising. I mean, there's lots of factors. You have fascist parties increasing in popularity in Germany and elsewhere. I mean, there's a powder keg that exists right now in Europe, and so the timing of this is quite interesting. So bottom line is, no chance it would be enforced. Almost certainly Israel will ignore it and continue on with U.S. Backing to some degree. I don't know how the U.S. publicly would state that, but it's going to be a problem in Europe.
Yeah. Then there is the other side, but you're absolutely correct. I think also that the worst aspect of this for I guess instruments of power in the Western world will be the civilian pressure, like their civil society getting more of a go ahead to like openly state, no, this is like an international court of justice ruling. This is genocidal unconditionally. It's not dissimilar to what happened after Amnesty International.
Way more Nicorette here.
Oh, same. I'm a big Nicorette guy myself, but
I alternate between. I don't like any of the flavors. I
Yeah.
alternate between like the mint and then the non-flavor one.
Oh my
because I
God,
just
that's
can't
what I
take-
do as well. I have the regular bubble gum here and then the mint one here.
Yeah.
The coated one.
I got
Yeah.
these ones. I have the European kind though. It's not as good as the American stuff. I need to.
Probably. This is the good stuff. This is Nicorette. It's like 4 milligram and 2 milligram. I
I just
go
dropped
between
down
those.
to 2 milligram.
Oh, nice. I mean, it's very effective if you're looking to stop smoking. I've been chewing it for years, but I stopped smoking years ago, but I still chew.
I know. I've narrowed my vice down. I'm on no pharmaceuticals except an allergy medication, and I just am on the nicotine. I don't drink alcohol anymore.
Same.
But I can't live without my nicotine.
Same.
All right. Anyway, we were talking about something serious. I didn't mean to do a commercial.
No,
for
it's
Nicorette,
fine.
but-
I'm in the same boat. But the thing I was gonna say is, beyond the
We were
pressure,
talking about civil society and
civil society and the pressure that will mount towards like the unconditional support afforded to Israel, making like a less popular position. It kind of cuts through that, and we saw a version of this in Amnesty International and other NGOs like human rights groups that normally do, in my opinion, oftentimes operate alongside the American State Department's interests, usually against America's foreign adversaries, more often than not. This was one of those instances when in 2021, when they all collectively openly admitted something that many people have known for quite a long time, that Israel was an apartheid state, that often, in my opinion, that was a part of the sea change, a part of the attitude shift, because it gave the permission to many, I guess, like squishy liberals even, to openly state things as they are, that Israel is undeniably an apartheid state. And I think that the ICJ decision, if it favors the South African position, will play a similar role. And slowly but surely it will chip away at the marginally chip away at the dominance that Israel has on Western media and our interests.
But earlier in your show, before I came on, I was watching, and you made reference to sort of people that are on your feed, sort of being more tapped in to things, and I'm sure that that's totally true, and this is true in general of a lot of the generation of people that are coming into adulthood right now. It's really interesting to look at how people get their information, and they're not held captive to just corporate media or, major media or media that, most quote unquote grown-ups have even heard of. And on this issue, you can stop a random young person, in the cities of many countries around the world and start talking to them about Palestine or Israel, and they're going to know a bunch about it. And what I think is really interesting is that this trick of the Israeli government of trying to force the world to believe that criticism of the Israeli government is criticism of Judaism or criticism of Jews or is anti-Semitism, that's done. That era's finished. That doesn't work anymore. And this is a recent thing. It does not work anymore. And I mean, I'm getting called an anti-Semite every day by these people, by these wackadoodles who are trying to convince the world that Israel somehow means Judaism. I talk to my friends who are Jewish all the time, and everybody is saying like these people do not represent us. And
Yeah.
but this is new. This is new that is piercing into the mainstream. This is the point I'm getting at. I think there's been a paradigm shattered here, and I think that people whose brains have not been poisoned by Hasbara and the sort of propaganda industry from Israel and in the United States, where it's drilled into your head too in American politics that you must support Israel. It's shifting.
Damn, this guy's good.